Good evening, members, officers, auditors. Anybody I've missed? No? Welcome to the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee meeting on Monday, the 19th of March. Apologies for absence. Debbie?
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillors English, Mrs Gooch and Perry.
Thank you. Any substitute members? No. Urgent items? I don't think there are any. Are there? No. No visiting members? Any disclosures by members or officers? Been up to anything you want to tell me about? No. Disclosures of lobbying? I think it'd be a first as an audit committee if we'd been lobbied, wouldn't it? Okay, to consider whether anything should be taken in private. There are no yellow pages tonight. So we quickly move on to minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of January. If I can just go through those with you. On page 1, page 2, stop me if you've got any comments. Page 3, page 4, I would just pick up on midway down on page 4 the issue about the fire drill when we had an alarm, and I did get an email, I think, from Alison, who responded on what happened in the fire drill. Anybody got anything else to add to that? Nope. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. 8 and 9. Are those minutes agreed, members? Thank you. Okay, so we move on to item 11. Sorry, what happened there? Oh, 9. Questions and answers from the public. Well, there aren't any members of the public here. Item 10, the committee work programme. We haven't been given one here, but I will just ask Mr Green to comment on that.
Yes, for your information, members, we're putting together the work programme for 18-19 at the moment. We've invited officers to come up with their proposals for the next year. I do have a couple of items that the Chairman has suggested already that we're putting on the work programme. One is an update on what we're doing on contract monitoring. We've appointed a new contracts monitoring officer, but there's quite a few things to feed back, so we'll be doing that. And the Chairman has also asked for a report on Maidstone property holdings and the governance around that. So those are two things which will be on the work programme for next year, and we'll circulate details once it's finalised. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Green. If anybody else has any suggestions they want to add to the work programme, I don't have sole right of doing that. Do put them forward to Mr Green, won't you? Okay, now we come to agenda item 11. Complaints received under Members' Code of Conduct. Who's looking after this? Christine, the floor's yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, you were last reported on the 20th of November 2017, and at that point there were two outstanding matters. These matters have now been finalised, and it was one to do with a borough councillor, and there was found to be no breach of the Code of Conduct, and another in respect of a parish council member, and again there was no breach of the Code of Conduct. The report very optimistically states in the paragraph above where those two matters are itemised in the report, paragraph 1.6, Since the last report to this committee on the 20th of November, there have been no new complaints. Unfortunately, members, there was one complaint come in today. It's always the way when you write something like that in a report, things are going to change. So one complaint has come in, but of course that's got to go through the process, and I can't comment on that at all. So thank you, Chairman. That's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Has anybody got any comments they'd like to make on this non-event report? Other than to say how pleased we are to see that there aren't any complaints until the one you've just mentioned. Mr. Cooling.
May I please ask, if I misheard it, my apologies, is that a borough member or parish council complaint?
I believe it is a borough council complaint, but that's all I can say. Thank you.
Okay, we're asked to note the report. Members, is that noted? Thank you. Now we move on to agenda item 12 to get an update on the problematic introduction of the General Data Protection Regulation. Ladies.
Thank you, Chairman. So the purpose of the report is to provide an update on progress with meeting the General Data Protection Regulation that comes into force on 25th May. The report outlines the progress made of raising awareness and training, auditing the information we hold, information sharing and the documentation we're required to have in process. A third of the total action plan has been completed. Just to make you aware, there's also some updated guidance from the Information Commissioner's Office in the papers, and we are not required to be fully compliant by 25th of May. However, we must be able to demonstrate that we have clear plans in place for compliance. Just to reassure you, a lot of work has been undertaken. However, there is still a lot more to be done, and that goes beyond the 25th of May. But I'm happy to take any questions that you may have on the subject.
Now, don't disappoint me, members. Mr. Cooling.
Thank you very much. In paragraph 2.4 of your report, which was very, very clear, thank you very much, it mentions that Policy and Information Managers are undertaking a training course provided by, has been undertaken. Who provided that course, may I ask?
So that was provided by Act Now. I can send you their details if you'd like, 'cause they're very good.
Follow on. In paragraph 2.5, the Council is currently awaiting an e-learning module for councillors from the LGA. Will that be available, or would that be available for free to parish councils?
Yes, the idea is it's going to be produced by the Local Government Association. It's meant to be free. We're still waiting for it to be uploaded. We attended a conference at the beginning of the year where they went through like basic introduction to GDPR and some other bits. And on that, there are a number of YouTube videos they've put up of the speakers. So I can send you a link. I can send the whole committee a link to that if you're interested to have a look if you want to find out more about GDPR. It depends. I'll send that round to you all. But yeah, we're waiting for that to come online because we'd like to advertise it. So once it does, we'll let you know.
Timescales, please.
Yeah, it's already been delayed once. We're expecting before Easter. But it's by the Local Government Association, so it's as and when they get it out.
I notice we've now gone on to the well-established colour coding system for risks in the table attached, and there's a lot of red and yellow. Which ones of these are you particularly concerned about? Clearly the red ones, but do you want to narrow down your concern any further than that?
Yes, particularly any of the red ones, obviously. The first one up there, which is suppliers can't demonstrate compliance. I suppose the risk there for us, which I'd be particularly concerned about, is we have a lack of control in that situation, and then we'll be forced into a situation where we're having to make a decision about whether we progress with that supplier or not. We we can enter into dialogue, which we're already doing at the moment. We can set out what we need from them, but if they aren't able to demonstrate that they comply with GDPR, which we are required to ensure that they do, that puts us in a position of having to make a decision about whether we look at elsewhere for suppliers. So that's obviously one particular concern. Also that there may well be additional costs involved that we have not planned for, because we could not plan for them, for us ensuring that they are compliant, and for any changes that may be needed to make to upgrade to a system to make that system easier to use, or because we are due an update and therefore they've included that compliance within that update. So it's a little bit, I can't provide much reassurance other than we are working with all of our suppliers. We are working very diligently, and managers are working very diligently, and we are working with IT, and we are working with the procurement team on this. It's a very joined up piece of work, but it provides a lot of unknown at the moment.
So is there any leeway on timescale on us to comply, taking that into account?
Yes, so the ICO has been very, very clear that as long as we have a plan, we can demonstrate what we are doing, that we have taken account of any risks that are involved and how we are planning to mitigate those risks, then there is leeway. They're not going to come down hard on us or put in any kind of fines for any reason. So, for example, with a supplier, we may choose to amend our processes, make the way that we do things perhaps longer, but reduce the amount of risk by putting more checks in place to ensure what we're doing means that we don't risk the loss of information, or we don't inadvertently share information, or whatever that may be. So we might have to change the way we do things and demonstrate that we've done that, we've assessed that risk properly. But yes, we can. We aren't on as long as we have that plan in place. We'll be fine in terms of timescales with the ICO.
I'll come back to you in a minute, Peter. It's somewhat concerning then if you consider shared services in the same light as suppliers, that you consider there's a greater risk that they won't be compliant before our suppliers over whom we've got no control. I'd like to think we had more control over our shared services.
We do. It's just that we haven't started the piece of work on this yet. So once I start the piece of work on this, then to my mind the risk will reduce. But at this stage, for me, I haven't started the piece of work, so it is a greater risk. Whereas we have a very clear plan in place for dealing with suppliers. We've identified all of those contracts. We know those conversations are being had. But the risk for that might stay the same for longer, whereas the risk for shared services will start to reduce once we've had those discussions and we've identified all of the areas of concern.
Okay. Mr. Calling.
Thank you, and thank you for drawing attention to the shared service arrangements, and apologies for being parochial, but as parishes receive the princely sum of about 120k a year through the parish services scheme, and we provide certain services that otherwise NBC would have to provide directly, is there any risk, and my question is very loaded, is there any risk that you're going to endeavour to have some oversight or involvement with parish councils?
Please excuse my ignorance now, but are they devolved services? Are they devolved services?
In my terminology, yes. They're services, if we weren't there, and in the non-parish parts of the borough, the borough provides directly, the parish councils provide them, they get some money from the borough and a lot more money from direct precept of parish.
Okay, without much, I don't want to give a definitive answer here. I will look into it, but my understanding is that if it's a devolved service, so a service that you are providing and that power has been passed down or it isn't a contractual arrangement, then you would become the controller, so you would bear that responsibility, not us, in the same way that we have services that we've taken from Kent County Council. But I would want to look into it in more detail.
I thoroughly welcome that, and I hope that, I believe it's correct, and I hope it is correct. And then if I just leave the thought, as I said at the last meeting, a number of parishes, I'm sure, are struggling with this. Particularly small parishes. I can only speak for my own. So any help, such as free online this, that and the other, any checklists, any source of expert help if our DPO gets into problems would be thoroughly welcome. I don't expect you to answer that now. Please take that on board. We could be hurting.
Yeah, I think as I stated previously, I'm more than happy to help and provide any assistance we can. The other thing I would encourage you to look at is the ICO's website. It's very good, and they've got a helpline, and they're very good. I'd go there as well. And we've developed our own need-to-know guides and fact sheets. I'm happy to share them with parishes. It's not a problem at all. Happy to circulate that information. I've also given a briefing to councillors. Again, I can share the presentation. So please don't hesitate to be in touch, and we'll pass it on. It's not a problem.
Are you saying that you would wait for the individual parish councillors to approach you, or you will fan something out?
I'm happy to send something out, but the approaches we've made so far haven't necessarily been fully welcomed. So I'm a bit reluctant to push it too hard in case I get knockback.
So you could just advise Calc, for example, that you are available. And I know Peter's involved with that, and perhaps he could pass it on.
Sure, there are no sensitivities here whatsoever, but I think if you wouldn't mind, you could say that I asked this committee, if you send to Calc, copy to me, that would be most helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Just two quick questions. On the risk register, you've got here about suppliers can't demonstrate that they meet the requirements. Have any systems been found yet?
I couldn't possibly tell you off the top of my head, sorry. Are you talking about systems in total, suppliers in total, or that don't demonstrate compliance yet?
We'll discuss it outside of here. Yeah. And my second question was, you've said that we're not going to be fully compliant by the date that they've introduced. What do we anticipate won't be compliant on our side by then?
Yes, I think if at the moment where we've got to is if you look, I can share our action plan if you want. Basically, we're up to the point of getting to March is becoming a crunch point for us. So any actions that were due in March are now probably going to be delayed back because things are rolling on. So it is going to be smaller stuff. It's going to be things like guidance on our website, additional guidance that we wanted to provide for staff, additional training that we wanted to have in place for staff as well. Yeah, we'll have our record of processing activities in place, which is really urgent. Some of our privacy notices may be delayed, but we'll have overarching ones in place, which is the most important thing, but it requires you to go down to processing level. We might not have one in place for every single processing activity.
Okay. Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. A lot of organisations that I deal with are writing to me asking for my permission to continue dealing with me. Does Maidstone Borough Council have to do the same thing?
For a majority of our processes, no, because we have normally in most cases a legal reason for delivering the service, or it's in the gift of us to have a public task. It's anywhere where we aren't required to provide a service, essentially. So it may be for some of our more minor marketing activities that we will have to do that. Also, we have a list of people that want to engage with our consultation services. If we're not clear with some of them that they actually want to continue to receive them, then we'll have to contact them. But it's very, very few and far between small activities.
Is that the point you're referring to there, Councillor, that people are asking you for your permission to contact you? Yes. Yeah. Well, I think that's common practice now. They can't take it for granted. They've got to get your agreement. Yeah, okay. Yes, Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. Do we know what the penalties or outcomes if a mistake is made?
Yeah, without scaring anyone really, they've increased the fine significantly. So currently it's up to £500,000 the ICO can fine. Under the new regime, it's up to 20 million euros. And we are still talking euros currently. So it's quite a substantial amount. What the ICO have said, and they've released numerous blogs and information, is they're not going to come in at the top level. And what I will say now is that currently they have the right to go up to 500,000, but the majority of the fines you see are for much smaller amounts. It really depends on the issue and what's happened. We ourselves have reported breaches and been investigated, and they've come back asking us to take action and not been fined. So it really depends on the incident, what's happened, and the impact on individuals, and that then determines the fine you're going to get. But yes, substantially more than it used to be.
Well, just a comment, I can see why it's being taken so seriously.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, if there are no more questions, we're being asked to note the update report. Is that noted, members? And keep up the good work, ladies. I know it's not easy. And keep us posted. Thanks a lot. Okay, moving on to item 13, where we're presented with a very colourful and erudite plan for next year, I think, aren't we? Is this what we're looking at? Rich, are you going to address this for us?
Yes, Chairman. Thank you. What we have presented for members tonight is our internal audit and assurance plan for 2018-19. This seeks to set out the risks as we see them facing the Council and how we propose to deal with those in the course of our internal audit work, leading towards, in a little over 14-15 months' time, delivering what will ultimately be a head of audit opinion for the year 2018-19. The plan aims to start with those risks from page 32, 33 onwards in the pack, talk through some of the risks to the sector, the headline global risks, GDPR being one of them, as you've just discussed here, including the eye-watering stat I found in one report that's referenced here, further to Councillor Butler's question about fines, that when Talk were fined £400,000 for a breach a year or so ago, estimate that the same fine would have been 60 million under GDPR. So it's very much making the same point as Mrs Woodhouse and Collier made earlier. This is a risk to the authority, and what we're saying there is that our approach on that particular risk is we're looking to take advantage of the fact that we offer support services across 4 local authorities by trying to undertake a cross-authority review in probably about a year's time, looking at how well all 4 authorities have implemented the GDPR responsibilities and aiming to draw attention to good practice that one or more of them may have adopted that the others could learn from. Running through those more global risks, we look at the risks that Maidstone have on its own strategic risk register from page 38 of the pack onwards, and some of the approaches that we intend to take to examine the effectiveness of the controls the Council uses to mitigate those risks. And weighing across that is the risk assessment that we undertake as auditors, looking at what we've learned from having looked at the area in previous years, the sort of financial values that the area incurs, and its prominence and profile within the Council's strategic plans. Having assessed the level of risk, then look at the level of resources available to the audit service, which is set out on pages 41 and 42. I'm required by the standards to make a positive declaration to you, if I can, that the level of resources I have available are sufficient to address the risks I've identified. I am able to make that assessment to you, that statement to you, for the reasons set out in the plan. And then from page 43 onwards, we go into some more detail about the specific known areas of audit work that we intend to undertake over the year. As the plan explains, these are areas where we've consulted with heads of service and senior officers within the council. Although the plan is compiled by me and my team independently, and again, standards oblige me to declare positively to you that the plan is independently compiled without undue influence. We've taken on board the comments that officers have made in producing this list of projects and other work, which forms the core of what we intend to undertake over the next 12 to 14 months, working towards an audit opinion. From page 48 onwards, goes into a little bit more detail about how we will actually execute those projects, the sort of process that we undergo, and the quality and consistency work that we undertake to ensure that the work is compliant with standards and delivers the sort of outcomes and objectives that the council would expect. And then finally, we end with some appendices for interest, a few pages on our audit universe, which is a rather grand term that's intended to portray all of the potential areas we might examine and sought to set out both when we last looked at them and when we might look at them again. Anything beyond 1920 onwards is provisional at this stage. You'll see another plan in 12 months that will set out the detail. But it's intended to give an indication of how frequently certain areas are subject to audit attention. And we often get questions from members, as in, when will you next be looking at X, Y or Z? Hopefully this appendix gives some of those answers, and so I'm happy to talk through those in more detail on request. Finally, go through some of the longer term issues we're considering, which haven't sort of coalesced into star systems within our audit universe just yet, but may do so as they become clearer. And always pleased to end our reports with a bit more detail about the audit team that I have working with us and the skills and experience we have to bear on completing this work. I'm again pleased to say that we've got a very strong team of auditors with a range of experience who produce, in my view, consistently good work that I hope members see and take assurance from where we're able to offer it. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rich. Yes, Councillor Hogg.
Thank you. Just want to say thank you for a brilliant report. I think it's captured everything we've discussed over previous meetings and has factored everything in. Will we as members get notified as these reports are completed, or do we have to go looking for them as time goes on?
The typical way is that we bring an interim summary to members, which I guess will be in the November meeting, subject to the work programme approval that Mark Green referred to earlier. That will summarise all of the reports that have been issued up to that point, and then you'll see an annual report at the end of the year, which will include the remainder. We don't typically notify for each report, but if there are ones that you're particularly interested in seeing in detail, I'll be happy to circulate those ones individually if members have a particular interest.
I hesitate you're suggesting there, Rich, that we get a mid-term report and an end-of-year report, I think, if I heard you correctly. I hesitate to suggest that we should get any more frequent reports because it simply burdens you with work. I don't know if that was behind your question, Councillor, was it that you would like to get more frequent update?
No, it was just to find out if we wanted to access them, what the best way to do so was, and that's been answered.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Goulding.
Absolute detail, Rich, on page 38. Fourth up from the bottom, delay in local plan adoption. Does that refer to the first review of the local plan, or what?
So this is one of the council's corporate risks. So it came out of the risk work that we did with CLT and wider leadership team at the start of the year. So it's actually one of the risks that is part of the quarterly process. There's a paper going to CLT tomorrow to update that. So the risk originally was around the impact in being able to deliver the things in the local plan should it be delayed either through not being adopted or through judicial review. So it needs to be changed a little bit. Obviously now the local plan has been adopted. So as I said, CLT tomorrow will consider how that risk should now be.
Apologies. May I suggest that an additional risk is factored into your next report, which is delay in adoption of the first review of the local plan?
Yeah, I can certainly discuss that tomorrow with CLT in terms of how they want to rephrase that risk, but we can take that into account, yeah.
Any other points, members? I'd like to echo Councillor Harvey's comments that on the quality of this report, Rich. It presents it in a very understandable form. In fact, I'm bound to ask, looking at the most colourful pages, which areas have you omitted from the list of auditable areas?
The notion of the audit universe is supposed to be that it's comprehensive, so I was prepared for the possibility that members might say, you don't seem to have included something, and I may have had to amend this, but if you haven't identified anything that I've missed, then I'm pleased to hear.
I haven't. Okay. Well, it's certainly a good base point going into the new year, and I congratulate you on that. But I'm just trying to find the papers which tell us what we're supposed to be doing. Okay, members. Page 26. We're being asked, firstly, to approve this plan for 28-19. Is that approved, members? Thank you. You can sigh relief there now, Rich. Note the Head of Audit Partnership's view that the Partnership currently has sufficient resources to deliver the plan and a robust Head of Audit opinion. Is that noted? And also note the Head of Audit Partnership assurance that the plan is compiled independently and without inappropriate influence from management. I think we take his word on that, but we note that, don't we? Noted. Okay. Moving on to agenda item 14, which you'll find on page 62. Is Ellie dealing with us? Yeah. Ellie, would you like to present it?
Thank you. So this report sets out our plans for delivering the 27-18 Statement of Accounts and draws your attention to some of the changes to the timetable that we've reported to you in previous meetings and how we've responded to those changes. Specifically, we are asking you to note two changes that this committee will see in its role in approving the accounts. Firstly, we'll no longer be asking you to formally consider a draft version of the accounts. They will be available on our website from the end of May, and we can hold a briefing session outside of the formal committee meeting to discuss them. But the timetable of needing to get the accounts approved in July doesn't really allow for that to be part of the process. The other slight difference in the process is because of the pressures on our external auditor and the timing of that. It's likely that the findings report that you'll consider in your July meeting as part of your approval of the accounts will need to come to this meeting as an urgent update, and that's purely down to the fact that the audit will start on the 9th of July and there won't be enough work completed in time for that to go out with the agenda papers and published a week ahead of the meeting. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any volunteers? Mr. Cooling.
Sorry to be a pain. I haven't got in my mind when our next formal meeting is, but I'm guessing it's maybe roughly 3 months from now. So I'm just wondering why in paragraph 1.4 it has to be an informal briefing session and for members to be held in June. And if our meeting is in June, why can't it be a formal agenda item? Forgive me.
So our timetable for preparing the draft accounts has been contracted. We have until the 31st of May to do that. It's very likely we'll be working right up to the 31st of May to get that draft out. There is a meeting in July to approve the final version of the accounts, the final statutory deadline being the 31st of July. An option would be to hold a meeting in June and a meeting in July. I suppose that was deemed to be unnecessary. There's no requirement for you to formally consider the draft, but open to discussion on that.
If we're going to have an informal meeting, or an informal briefing session in June, if that's supposed to be by email or whatever it is, so be it. But if we're actually going to get together physically, why isn't it a formal meeting?
I would be quite happy with an informal briefing Q&A session, bearing in mind then that the findings that come out of that will be presented at our July meeting as a late update. I think that's what you said, wasn't it, Ellie? So that they would be presented to the committee at that time, along with the final accounts. Is that right?
Yes, so the idea of that would be to reflect any comments you have on the draft statement and to incorporate them, if necessary, into the final version of the accounts that you approve. I think we can do it however you want to do it. We can hold an informal briefing if there's concerns around your oversight of the accounts. We can do it more formally if that's a preference.
Chairman, it's your call, obviously, on this.
Well, I would find the discussion, bearing in mind the format of these accounts is changing, and one of the things I did note in the report on page 64, there's been a review of the Statement of Accounts documents to declutter and remove any unnecessary sections, which I welcome, because I think it will make the whole process more easier to understand and perhaps debate. And I think I prefer an open debate, bearing in mind their draft at that stage, and we can probably get more familiarised with what's coming at us in the July meeting. So unless members feel strongly otherwise, I would be happy to go along with what's being suggested. Sorry, Councillor Fisson, would you like to say something, or are you just acknowledging what? Okay. And you too, Councillor Harvey, you're happy with that? Councillor Webb? Yeah. Councillor Atkinson, are you happy with that? We'll do it in your absence. Yes, okay. Are there any other comments to make on this? I wonder whether the auditor would like to just comment on the pressure he's feeling under the new timetable.
Yes, it's clearly more concentrated. The reason why we're starting at the date that Ellie sets out in the report is that we've taken all of the councils in Kent and put them into 3 phases with a view to just plough through them in that period. So we've organised the work to ensure that we can deliver across all of Kent. But it's the way we've put the pieces of the puzzle together. It just means a slightly later start for this council, and that's no reflection at all on your arrangements. In many ways, it highlights the fact that we think it should be a fairly quick and smooth audit, and we can rely on the work of the finance team here.
So no concerns there, then? Very good. Well, we're asked to note the arrangements and the discussion that we will have regarding the considering the draft version of the accounts. We will record it as being a briefing. The date, I guess, You've suggested a date here, haven't you? Oh, no, you haven't. You just said in June, so a date in June to be decided. Is that all right? And that the external auditor's audit findings report will be presented as an urgent update to the agenda for July's meeting. Will the external auditor be available at our briefing? Would that be anticipated or not?
I hadn't planned to, but if that's something you'd find useful, then we're happy to try and accommodate that.
Shall we decide nearer the date? Okay, thank you for that. Okay, members, is it all noted? Heads nodding. Lovely. Thanks very much. Okay, moving on to agenda item 15. We'll consider the report of the external auditor. Would you like to address it, sir?
Thank you, Chairman. So this is hopefully a familiar report style for you. On page 74, we just set out at a high level the progress of the audit to date. We've completed our risk assessment. We're planning to undertake some early work later this month. The risk assessments allowed us to complete and prepare an audit plan, which is the next item on your agenda, so I won't say anything more until we reach that. On page 75, we set out just the key deliverables and where we are against those. The audit plan we've talked about on this agenda. We have the audit findings report that's just been mentioned for your July meeting, and the other key elements are the annual audit letter, which would be in August, September, and the annual certification letter of the grant claims work that we undertake, which will be later on in this year. The rest of this report just sets out information that's happening in the wider sector that we think you may just find of interest. Happy to take any questions members may have.
Members, any questions? We're letting him off the hook on this one, are we? We'll get him on the next item. Okay. We're asked to note it. Have we noted it? Very good. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 16. Sir.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is the annual plan. It sets the framework for the audit that we're going to undertake, both on the financial statements and the work that we intend to undertake to give the value for money conclusion. On page 97 of your papers, we put the audit into context of your operation and the environment in which you're operating in. On pages 98 through to 100, we set out those potential risks to the financial statements and highlight where we're going to spend most of the audit effort to ensure that the financial statements in those areas are materially and accurately correct. On page 102, we report to you our calculation of materiality, and again that will drive our reporting of any issues that we find back to you, so that if they're material, if we find a material error, we'll enter into discussion with officers about changes to the financial statements. If we find errors that are below materiality but above the trivial threshold that we set out here, then we'll report those back and invite members to discuss with officers whether changes ought to be made to the financial statements or not. On page 103, we highlight the work that we intend to do on the value for money conclusion following a risk assessment, and it's probably of no surprise that it focuses on medium-term financial sustainability. And then in the rest of the audit plan, we set out the logistics, we confirm our independence, and highlight the audit fees. Happy to take any questions members may have.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Can I just ask, the risks on page 98 and 99, are they unique to us that you've identified, or are they more generic across all the councils you're looking at?
I think it's fair to say, given the nature of audit and the nature of local authorities, they're fairly generic risks.
Any other comments at this stage? I would just ask on page 100, where you express the employee remuneration as a significant percentage of the council's operating expenses, but in arriving at 16%, it's clear you've taken in the housing benefit that we handle, but it isn't really part of our operating expenses. And I think it gives, I think I'm correct in saying that, and it does give a misleading indicator of our payroll expenditure as a percentage of our operations. Would you just like to comment on that?
So we calculate materiality for the audit on your gross expenditure. The housing benefit that you pay out is clearly part of that gross expenditure, and the percentage we've attributed to employee costs reflects the gross housing benefit expenditure in your accounts.
Yeah, I can see what you've done. I'm questioning why it's done that way, because I would expect to see employee costs at something like 60 or 70% of our operating costs, as opposed to including pass-through funds that we don't actually do anything other than pass through.
It's just the very fact that it is, as I've said, because it's shown as expenditure, and it also shows the income, and we base it on the gross expenditure.
So you consider it operating expenditure?
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments, members? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you. On page 96, it says clearly trivial has been set at £90,700. Well, it doesn't seem particularly a trivial amount to me. And in the presentation we just had, we said authorisations above 75,000 had to have sort of the highest level of authorisation. So it does seem a very, very high figure to be trivial. Can you explain your definition of trivial beyond that, obviously?
No, I think it's trivial in the sense of the total expenditure and the total income that's reflected through your statement of accounts. I accept to the man on the street, 90,000 isn't trivial, and I don't mean to imply that to the man on the street that that's not the case. But we have to frame the audit based on your spend. We calculate triviality as a percentage of materiality, so I think it's calculated at 5% of materiality. And that just provides a basis upon which we can then report back and request officers to make any changes if we find errors. If we had that lower, the impact would be that for every error, be it in the notes or in the main statements that we found, we would be asking officers to make those changes. So it potentially increases the amount that we have to do and report back. So it's just trying to strike a balance between ensuring that the statements are fairly presented and finding the most economic and efficient way of achieving that objective.
By no means a trivial sum. You're quite right, Councillor Atkinson. This has been a discussion we've held, I think, previously. Mr. Cooling was involved in that, if I recall rightly. Would you like to comment again, just to make sure you've got it right?
I'd like to pick up on what you said, Chairman, about pass-through expenditure. And I would have thought, if we're trying to look at the accuracy, dependability, and that's not casting any aspersions on the costs of our operational activity, I would have thought the errors should be related as a percentage of non-pass-through expenditure.
Well, I think you'd have seen from my reaction, I probably would agree with you, but it is the way that the auditor does it, and who are we to argue with our external auditors on a matter such as this?
I thought that's what this committee not argue with, but have an open discussion about. And fine, I understand that if extra errors crop up, there's extra work that needs to be done. But is the balance right? Because I agree with you, these figures, given the scale of the costs we absorb internally, if you follow me, they are huge.
And in my view, the whole thing as presented like that is misleading. But our auditors tell us that's what they have to do. We've made our point, three of us. We probably will. Okay. What are we asked to do? On page. Help. Okay. Thank you. Okay, on page 89, members. We're just asked to note it. Is that noted? I think the other thing I'd note, Darren, is it's about time you updated your photo. I'm just getting my own back, if that's all right.
Well, what are you trying to say, Chairman?
I don't want to personalise it. Okay, page 110, agenda item 17. This is an update on the budget risks facing the Council. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've asked me last year to provide regular updates at each meeting on budget risks, and this report sets out the latest position. You'll see that the overriding risks remain the same as reported previously, mainly performance of the national economy and lack of clarity about what local government funding will look like after 2020. The report focuses mainly on things that have changed since I last reported to you in January. Specifically on the wider economy, we've continued to see bad news over the past few months, particularly on the retail sector. And that does matter for the Council because about a third of our business rates income comes from retail. And of course, over the past few weeks, we've seen Maplins and Toys R Us going out of business. And the way that this impacts us is through our business rates income. We only get to keep about 8% of the total business rates income that we collect, about £4 million. But because we have to pay a fixed amount of that over to central government, the amount that is subject to fluctuations is very high, and so if business rates income turns down, that will have an adverse effect on us. On the question about local government funding, I've said that we don't know what will happen after 2020. Obviously, we've got the 4-year funding settlement that takes up to March 2020. And we don't know what will happen after that. It does look as though there won't be major changes after 2020 for the simple reason that the House of Commons has got a lot of work to do to get through Brexit legislation, so it's unlikely there'll be new primary legislation around local government funding, but there's still quite a few things that they can do just within the existing system. And a particular thing that the government's doing at the moment is carrying out what they're calling a fair funding review. The idea being to make sure that different local authorities are funded fairly. It's not about changing the overall size of the local government pot. It's about distribution of money. And I've suggested in the report that there's a risk that with all the concern about funding of adult social services and children's services, district councils, which aren't responsible for those services, might lose money to the county councils and unitary authorities that are responsible for adult social services and children's services. And, I mean, there's no doubt that county councils are facing a lot of pressure in those areas. It was one of the reasons for Northamptonshire County Council's failure, although there were other things going on there as well, but that certainly put them under a lot of pressure. You might say, well, what have we got to lose because we don't get any revenue support grant from central government anymore. But even though we don't get a grant from central government, there is this thing called negative revenue support grant, which we're having to pay in 1920 to government of 1.6 million. And the way that the system is currently structured is if the government thinks, oh, well, Maidstone is so well resourced that it doesn't need money from us, or it can afford to give money to other authorities, they would just increase the negative revenue support grant. So there is a risk for us from the fair funding review. The other area of risk that I've highlighted is about the capital programme. Now, the reason for this isn't that the inherent risks have changed. We still think that it should be possible to finance the capital programme and that we've got strong controls about delivering it. But what's changed, though, is in the budget that members agreed recently, the size of the capital programme has gone up from 60 million over 5 years to 75 million. So just because the scale of the capital programme has increased, then there's a greater risk. But I would say that we are doing everything we can to mitigate the risks around the capital programme in terms of strong project management and making sure there's business cases for the things that we fund. So there are mitigations in place for that and indeed for all the risks that are here. So those are the things that I think have changed over the past few months in the risks that we face, but very happy to take any questions that you may have on the detail in the report or the risk register. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Can I just ask on the risk page on, 116, the hieroglyphics there. Are we looking here at the 5-year projection, or are you looking at just 2018-19?
I'm looking at budget risks over the medium term, which is the way that we do our projections with the medium-term financial strategy.
Okay, members. Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Just 2 questions. I'm pleased but surprised that we haven't got any reds on any of this. Is there any likelihood that any of these could shift into the red anytime soon? And my second question is, in light of what we just saw in the external auditor's report about risks, do any of the things that they've identified in their report need to be factored in here so that we've almost sort of preempted them?
Sorry, was your first question about why there were no red risks?
Yes, but more specifically, is there any chance of any of them moving into red anytime soon?
We've certainly shown some of these as red in the past, but I mean the judgment at the moment is that there aren't any red risks. And remember, this is specifically looking about risks to the budget. The audit risks that were mentioned in the previous report are dealing with something a bit different. So far as the budget's concerned, I mean, we do have a balanced budget for next year. We've got a sound medium-term financial strategy. So I'm happy to be challenged on this, but I do think that we don't, fortunately, have any actual red risks around the budget as such.
That's fine. That's brilliant. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Chairman. This capital programme, is this what other councils near to us are doing the same?
there's a huge variation in the size of different councils' capital programme, and at one extreme you've got a local authority like Spelthorne, which spent over 300 million buying an office complex. Closer to home, Ashford have got a development of 80 or 90 million in the town centre. So our 75 million, I would say, is probably about the middle of the pack. It's not the biggest, but it's not the smallest either.
I would say that seeing that there are no red risks and furthermore black ones in the chart would indicate that we're in for a fairly docile period of financial activity over the next 5 years. And I share your concern that that might be a bit optimistic, looking 5 years ahead. But I think we'll note it, as we're probably asked to do, and we'll monitor it. I think that's a good idea, don't you, Councillor Harvey? Jolly good. Okay. No other comments? Yes, page 110. So we're asked to note the updated risk assessment. Is that noted, members? What's that? Oh, yes. Okay. Okay, moving on to agenda item 18. Oh, yes. Would you like to address this item?
I'll introduce it, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report is required because of a slightly unusual situation that we face as a council, where we're acting both as developer and as planning authority in the developments that are shortly to kick off at Brunswick Street and Union Street. As I say, it's unusual. It's not totally exceptional. Councils do develop property in their own right. But because we're on both sides of the fence, as it were, with these developments, you don't have the normal situation where the planning authority would enforce obligations on the developer, for example, to provide affordable housing. We can't have that kind of relationship internally to compel us to take the actions we're supposed to do. So the way that we've got round this, and this is based on advice from leading counsel, is to set up what's called an enforcement subcommittee, which has the brief of making sure that we fulfil our obligations as developer and do what we've said we would do, which specifically on these developments, amongst other things, is to provide a level of affordable housing. And to make sure that the enforcement subcommittee has a degree of independence, amongst the 6 members who are designated to form part of the enforcement subcommittee is an independent person who must be neither an employee nor an elected member of the council. And the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee, being the committee charged with governance matters, is the appropriate body to decide who should be that independent person who sits on the enforcement subcommittee. And what you're invited to do, well, first of all, just to note the requirement to appoint an independent person to the enforcement subcommittee, and then to either agree the appointment of the independent person, and the report sets out the paragraph 1.8, the criteria for somebody who could fulfill that role, or if you're not able to make an appointment here and now, or if you feel you're not able to make an appointment here and now, to agree the process for making an appointment, which would be a process of going through advertising and reviewing applications for the position. So that's what you're asked to do as a committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. It is quite apparent, I think, if we look around the table, there's probably only one person on here that would fit the bill, and that's Mr. Cooling, who has expressed a willingness to undertake it if asked. But I would also like the committee to have the opportunity to discuss that, and I think it would be unfair to put Mr. Cooling in the position when he just has to sit there and listen to our views. With his agreement, I would like to suggest that he probably absents himself from this part of the meeting. Peter, what would you like to say?
I'm happy to be thrown out of the meeting, but please, this is it's an unusual situation, let's be clear. And in 1.7, para 1.7, it's to resolve any disputes or differences. Well, if two directorates within the borough can't resolve their differences, I think it would be a firing offence for one of them if it actually came up to this subcommittee. That's a cynical observation. And confirming the discharge of the planning obligations, if I remember rightly, they add up to about 100k or something of that order. And if they're not carried out, that pocket of the borough has to give them back into this pocket of the borough. So those are two cynical observations, but it's something that has to be done. And if it saves the borough money in not advertising, goodness knows what, yeah, I'm happy to do it. But as you can perhaps guess, I'd like to believe I could work effectively with others, but I may ask too many questions. But I'll now leave.
Well, I think, Peter, depending on the outcome of the discussions, you'd be fully entitled to have a thorough briefing on what's involved and how any queries you might have would get resolved. This is not a yellow page item. Well, okay, if you want to be formal, you better open it again then. But it's not a yellow page item. I just think it was fair to Peter that if we had a free discussion on whether we were happy that he should take the role. If we're not, the options are that we then have to advertise and find some other independent person. Would you like to comment on this, Councillor Hart?
Yeah, just to say I'm quite happy for Peter to do it, and I'm happy to propose it if you need someone to do so. I think it makes sense for it to be Peter, and if he's happy to do so, he might do it. Does it in any way jeopardise his position on this committee if he's on that one as well? Is there any conflict of interest?
No, I can't see any conflict of interest because this committee is set up for a very specific purpose, which bears no relation to what Audit Committee does. So I can't see a conflict.
Councillor Atkinson. Thank you. Would you just like to comment, Councillor?
Well, it's just a sound and obvious choice.
Well, I think so. It has my support. So is that agreed then, members? Agreed? Okay. Thank you very much. Peter's obviously expecting to come back. Yes, do. I think if there's further discussion on the role, if there's then any difference of opinion, it'll come back to the committee and we'll have to, or I think we should take the step of delegating authority to the director.
One of these proposals kind of affects my ward. So would I have to reserve my right to speak?
In what way does it affect your ward? The development proposal, you mean?
Yes, that's correct.
the way the enforcement subcommittee works is there is also a representative of the relevant ward on there, but I understand that both of these developments are in High Street ward rather than your ward, so we're looking at that very specific area.
Yes, that's correct, but one of them has a significant impact where the ward border is, and it affects the area from residents on the border in my ward.
I suppose what I'm saying is that because it's the High Street ward member who's on the enforcement subcommittee and who has the direct involvement, your involvement is at one remove, and so I don't see that it gives you a problem so far as the decision this evening is concerned.
Thank you for raising the point, though. Mr. Calling, you'll be pleased to know that the committee was happy to endorse your nomination for this, and I was just in the process of, for this post, I was just in the process of saying that if in the course of taking that up and further discussion with the Council of the on the role, if there was any disagreement subsequently, then I was going to propose that we delegate authority to the director to find an alternative appointment. But we are content with your appointment. How does that sound?
Okay, that sounds fine. I've just heard your comments there. The definition of land, I suppose, is actually specific to the geographical limits of these two sites, but you're adjacent, aren't you? Yeah. But it strikes me that subcommittee could actually suggest to itself that there might be other directly interested parties who might come along, but I will say that at the meeting if necessary.
Okay, so what are we asked to do here? We're asked to note the need for an appointment, and we're asked to agree the appointment. Is that agreed then, members? Before closing the meeting, I would just like to say that Councillor Butler, who has been a long-serving member on this committee, is standing down at the forthcoming election, so this is his last audit meeting, and I would just like to thank him for his contribution, diligent as ever, to the committee's procedures over many years.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've escaped.
Not yet. Okay, then. Yes, Councillor Hogg.
Sorry, can I just ask, should we have made that another recommendation that if anything happens with Councillor Calling, it should go back to Mr. Green? Should we have put that on here?
I think that's a very, very valid point. Will you note that, Debbie? Thank you for pointing that out. Okay. Meeting closed? Meeting closed. Thank you very much.